In February of this year, 1 million moms called for a boycott of the 2021 Girl of the Year doll, Kira, because she has two lesbian great aunts who are in a same-sex marriage. The group is also known for boycotting Rainbow Oreos, the Pixar movie Onward, a Super Bowl ad featuring drag queens, and the Hallmark Channel. Lovely. To this, American Girl responded, American Girl was built on a foundation of diversity and inclusion, and we remain committed to empowering the next generation of girls who will emerge as leaders who value empathy, equality, and respect. And you might be thinking to yourself, wow, all of this contention over a toy, and to that I say that's not even the tip of the American Girl iceberg. So today, as you can probably tell by the title of this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the American Girl franchise, the history of the company, the doll hierarchy and flex culture, the online games, the movies, and of course the controversies, and how one of them ended up on the same dubious toy list as the breastfeeding baby doll and Harry Potter's vibrating broom. We'll also be diving into alternatives for the American Girl dolls, including their Canadian cousins, and one toy line I wish I could erase from my memory. And before we start, here are some disclaimers. I'm going to be saying girls a lot in this video, but know that though historically the company was founded with girls in mind, these toys can appeal to and be played with by kids of all genders. Secondly, if you hate the American Girl dolls and dolls as a whole and see no redeeming qualities in them, that's fine and that's valid. And if you love them and they're a huge part of your identity, that's also fine and valid. This is just my own take based on research I've done, and I'm just sharing my thoughts. Lastly, this video won't cover everything in the American Girl doll franchise because that would take months, so just keep that in mind, and without further ado, let's go. Dolls as toys have been around for centuries, and whether you find them scary or love them and collect them to this day, they are sometimes seen as divisive toys. Why is this? Well, because everything marketed towards girls is automatically a point of moral contention. Think back to Twilight and my boy band video. It hasn't always been that way, but I'd say from the mid-1900s to today, girls playing with dolls and what kind of dolls we're giving to girls has been a mild political talking point. Whether it's someone bringing up the fact that Barbie was based on a German call girl doll, or moms not buying brats because they're a bad influence, parents are gonna parent. And honestly, a lot of it, at least to me, is usually nonsense. Yes, dolls and more generally toys do influence kids, but I don't think letting your kids play with brats or watch Disney princess movies is going to turn them into what you think playing with brats or watching Disney princess movies will do. And it's kind of shitty, at least to me, how we want toys to be good role models for our kids instead of, I don't know, maybe you as a parent being a good role model for your kid. But anyway, because dolls have to be good role models, parents are always trying to find the best ones, and if you have the money, the regular dolls just aren't gonna cut it. Enter the luxury doll brand American Girl. With their boutique boxes and $110 price tag for their historical dolls and $200 customizable dolls, this is supposedly the creme de la creme of doll brands. And though they fetch a hefty price, the quality does speak for itself, and like high-end garments, it's not easy to make an American Girl doll. However, the problem is accessibility. If these dolls, especially those representing marginalized groups, are so expensive, how can those at the bottom ever hope to have access to them? It's a big issue and controversy surrounding the dolls, so keep that in your head for later. But let's get into the meat of it. How did the American Girl dolls become a thing? So American Girl started out as a catalog-based enterprise in 1986 by Pleasant Rowland, a then textbook author, TV reporter, and teacher. She had $1.2 million of textbook royalties saved and was privileged enough to set $200K aside just in case the whole thing failed. When I think of Pleasant Rowland, I usually just imagine Joe Bennett from The Office. Anyway, in 1984, she took a trip to Colonial Williamsburg and thought that girls might get more into history if they could relate to it through a doll. And later, when she was shopping for her nieces for Christmas, she noticed that all there was were Cabbage Patch dolls and Barbies, and according to her, here I was, in a generation of women at the forefront of redefining women's roles, and yet our daughters were playing with dolls that celebrated being a teen queen or a mommy. It's not a stretch to say that the American Girl dolls were there to be the not like other dolls doll for girls, but we're going to get more into that later. She then decided to sell the dolls via catalog in which one could call and place orders, and the first three dolls were Kirsten, a Swedish immigrant growing up on the frontier, Samantha, a wealthy Edwardian girl being raised by her grandmother, and lastly Molly, a girl growing up through World War II. The dolls came with beds, period costumes, and trunks to carry them and their belongings. In addition, one could also dress like their American Girl doll in period clothing. The dolls themselves were highly intricate and not made of simple plastic or rubber, but rather spun cast vinyl, and their body was and still is hand-stuffed and made of cloth with a zip tie around the neck that attaches the head. The faces, at least according to the site, are molded by hand and are inherently made to be asymmetrical, just like real people. And making an American Girl doll, specifically the historical ones from conception to release, can take anywhere between a year to 5, as it takes time to craft a story, consult with specialists from a certain time period or ethnic group, and it's not something the company takes lightly. Along with the dolls come books, which are also sold separately, which detail their stories and histories. Each book also comes with a section at the end that teaches the real history behind the events of the book. For example, Samantha's story focused a lot on child labor at the turn of the century, and so the historical section of the book might focus on factory conditions and the social experiment that was the orphan train movement of the late 1800s and early 1900s. Later, the line would expand to include Addie, a black girl who was enslaved and later runs away with her mother, Felicity, a girl growing up through the Revolutionary War, and Josefina, a girl living in New Mexico still under Spanish colonialism. These were the 6 original dolls, and as the company grew, so did their line, later adding in Kit from the Great Depression, Kaya, a Nez Perce girl living in the Pacific Northwest pre-contact, Rebecca Rubin, a Jewish immigrant living in New York City in the early 1910s, Nanea, a biracial native Hawaiian girl growing up during the attacks on Pearl Harbor, Mary Ellen, a girl growing up in the 50s who has polio, Melody, a black girl growing up in 1960s Detroit, Julie, a girl growing up in the 1970s, and Courtney, a girl growing up in the 1980s. Some of them were also given friend dolls. For example, the first historical Asian American Girl doll, Ivy Ling, was Julie's companion, and Cecile Ray, Marie Grace Gardner's friend, was released in tandem with her. Recently, however, the best friend dolls were retired, meaning that Ivy Ling was retired, and there is currently no Asian American Girl doll that's historical available. Besides the historical dolls, American Girl has other lines of dolls which include baby dolls, the Girl of the Year doll, the Contemporary doll line, the Truly Me doll line, and the Welly Wisher doll line. And for the sake of this video, I am mainly going to be talking about the historical doll line, as that's the one that I grew up with and the one that the company was founded on and why it's remembered to this day, but I will briefly recount to you the details of some of the other doll lines so you can see how the company has grown. Firstly, the Girl of the Year doll line is available just for the year the doll is released. Their story takes place in contemporary times and sometimes includes friend dolls. The first American Girl doll of Asian descent was actually Jess, who was half Japanese, but was only available for the year she was released, which was 2006. In addition, Sonali Matthews was an Indian American doll available for the year of 2009 and was a companion to Krissa, the doll of the aforementioned year. Next, there's the Contemporary doll line, which only includes a few dolls and is an unofficial name, but it includes Z Yang, who is a Korean American doll and who was retired in 2018. The first Boy American Girl doll is also part of this line and came out in 2017. His name was Logan Everett and he was also retired in 2018. You can still buy Boy American Girl dolls, however, with their customizable line and with their Truly Me line, which we'll talk about now. The Truly Me dolls are a set of dolls with a wide range of features that go for $145 if you don't want to splurge for the create your own dolls, which are $55 more expensive. Lastly, there's the Welly Wisher doll line, which is for younger kids who might not be ready for the responsibility of caring for a $110 doll, as they're made of plastic and are a bit cheaper. And before we talk about flex culture, class, and not like other dolls, I want to talk about a pretty big bone of contention with the company, and that is representation and history. In the 90s and early 2000s, there was this movement of trying to revitalize US history for a younger generation. There were the American Girl dolls, of course, but also Disney's America and everyone's favorite TV show, Liberty Kids. Please tell me I'm not the only one that remembers Liberty Kids. But let's focus on that middle one, Disney's America, because I think their story parallels nicely with the American Girl Company. So there's a Defunctland episode on this if you want to know more, but essentially Disney wanted to create a park similar to that of Colonial Williamsburg, but bigger. Rather than just focusing on the Revolutionary War era, they wanted to tackle it all. The park was going to be in Virginia, close to Williamsburg, Busch Gardens, and some historic Civil and Revolutionary War battlefields. This idea was initially supported, but as more about the proposed park came out, the more people became very worried and very angry. First, you had the backlash from people who didn't want Disney desecrating Civil War battlefields, and then you had people who just didn't want Disney tackling historical events like slavery and genocide, which is basically all of US history. There was a big worry that Disney would trivialize history, commercialize history, and if they were going to do a realistic portrayal of the story of the US, the argument was that kids shouldn't be exposed to that. In addition, there were concerns that Disney would have political biases in the park, either being too conservative or too liberal. Most people, I don't think, see Disney as a liberal company, unless you're part of 1 Million Moms. But anyway, because of this, the park was never fully realized. In my opinion, you just can't really tell US history in a nuanced way if you're a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate and where profits are the driving factor. No matter how hard you try, it's going to come off as cynical and just awkward. Even just the idea of Disney's America, at least to me, also really speaks to white privilege, in that white people can enjoy and vacation in any time period in history, whereas other groups can't. Disney's America failed, so it would make logical sense that the American Girl franchise would also fail, as it commercializes US history and is part of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, but it didn't. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they treated kids with respect and proved that they could tackle the hard stuff. I think it's also because the dolls and brand have become status symbols, and in a society where commodities are fetishized, that's important, but we'll get to that soon. In all, though, it was a big risk to tackle American history through toys because I think to a lot of people that seems reductive. But that's mainly, in my opinion, because some adults don't think kids can learn about hard things or be interested in stuff like history. Rowland had a bit of a hard time getting her company off the ground because focus groups and others around her thought that kids couldn't handle them. She recalled at the 25th anniversary of the company a decade ago that she was met with, "Are you kidding? Historical dolls in the day and age of Barbie?" And that's annoying because kids do care about history and learning. Not to mention that girls specifically have to face the stereotype that they're not as smart as boys are, so it was cool that the company was founded on this notion that yes, girls are smart, capable, and are interested in history. Though they shouldn't have to pay such a high price to access that education, should that fall solely on the shoulders of a conglomerate? I don't think so, but this is a capitalist hellscape. I should mention that the books can be found at your local library or at your school library and are sold separately, but there definitely is a class factor when it comes to the dolls themselves and their accessories, and that shouldn't be ignored. But when it comes to the history angle, I think they did take a risk by not just having customizable modern-day dolls, but intentionally creating complex historical stories, and proved for the most part that they could handle it. From consulting Nesper's cultural arts coordinator Anne McCormack and others to be as accurate as possible, for example, Kaya's teeth aren't shown in her design purposely due to cultural practices, to Addie being the first doll to have a formal advisory board to make her story as sensitive as possible. And Addie's story is actually loosely based on Mary Walker, an adult enslaved black woman who escaped to Philadelphia. I also went to Addie's page while making this video, and at the time her doll was totally sold out, illustrating her popularity. At first glance, I think it's easy to mock the historical American Girl doll line just like it's easy to mock Disney's America. Like they kind of just expose the harsh reality that you cannot tell history well under capitalism where profits come before people. And I get it, the taglines of a lot of the dolls are very reductive and tokenizing, especially when you realize how many white dolls there are compared to non-white dolls. I think it would be cool if they had more than one doll for each time period, illustrating the myriad of stories that make up different eras. They kind of did this with Ivy Ling and Julie and Cecile Ray and Marie Grace, but Ivy, Cecile, and Marie Grace are no longer available. Lastly, I do think that there is some fetishization of the dolls of color or the dolls from ethnic backgrounds because they're seen as exotic to collectors. There are some doll collectors who love to show off their dolls of color, and that not only fetishizes the dolls, but also objectifies the culture they represent. But I don't think that's necessarily the fault of the company, but rather a symptom of living in a racialized society. In all, I do think that their success means that kids and families are ready and have been ready for complex stories about their own history, even if the main appeal to some people is just buying them as status symbols or because they like the cute outfits. And I think not looking into them more deeply than just their very reductive taglines that yes, do feel uncomfortable at times is a disservice to all the hard work that's put into them by historians and artists, and to the kids and adults that like them and who have valid, complicated feelings about them. But in the end, American Girl is part of a multi-billion-dollar toy conglomerate, and they're going to do what's best for them, and if minority stories don't sell, they're not going to focus on them no matter how much they tout the importance of diversity and being able to see yourself in US history. And I think that this can be best illustrated in how Rowland acted toward Melody Rosales, the first illustrator of Addie's books, who didn't want to edit her work to make a black woman smile more. Rowland said to her, I'm not paying you to be a historian, I'm paying you to be a bear of hands, and then fired her. So when I was in first grade, we had this thing called Star Day, where each Friday a kid would be picked to essentially just do a massive toy haul. The kid would bring in their family and as many toys as they wanted to, and just talk about themselves. I don't know why we did this, but it was definitely a time for parents and kids to flex their wealth. And this was pre-2008 financial crash in an affluent white suburb, so everyone was really into it, and if you had an American Girl doll, it meant that you had money. Having one didn't mean that you were necessarily interested in dolls or learning about history, but that you could afford one, and that's what mattered. Even at 6 and 7 years old, we already knew that there was like a toy hierarchy and, in other words, a class hierarchy, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Anyway, families would use Star Day as a way to flex on each other, whether intentionally or not, and looking back, I think that says a lot about the prestige of the American Girl dolls, who was buying them, and what for. So let's first talk about the doll hierarchy. At the time, you had the classic Barbie dolls, the Mycene dolls with their detachable feet, the Bratz dolls with their huge heads, and Polly Pocket with their rubber clothes. And though, of course, you have the collector's edition Barbies that are meant to be put behind a glass case and never played with, most of the dolls from these lines were an accessible price range and therefore disposable and not something that was meant to be carefully played with and treasured. You could throw them across the room, draw on them, step on them, whatever. And this is the first thing that set the American Girl dolls apart. They were not meant for that. That doesn't mean that kids wouldn't tear their heads off or break their legs, but that they were really expensive, so you would want to wait to give your kid one until they were ready. There was a wait to getting an American Girl doll. You had to have some sort of maturity to not only understand that this doll cost $100 but that they had a story behind them. And this, of course, appealed to certain groups of parents who love history, period clothing, and just dolls in general, and who wanted to share that love with their kid. It also appealed to parents who for some reason moralized dolls and hated the aforementioned Barbie, Bratz, and Mycene for having no educational value. American Girl also appealed to the nostalgia in older adults, not only parents but grandparents who remember Molly's Day or Kids era. And like I said earlier, the original catalog sold matching historical outfits so you could match with your doll, and you could bet some parents went gaga over these. So you had two big demographics that you could appeal to. Firstly, history lovers, and secondly, doll lovers, parents and grandparents who bought these dolls to be passed down like heirlooms. And the Venn diagram for these two groups is a circle. The last big reason why American Girl was so popular, especially among the wealthy, was because they held a certain social currency. If you were really wealthy, you could just give one to your kid and not really care if they didn't treat it with kid gloves. The American Girl dolls were just as disposable as the $1999 Barbie. And I remember some kids who treated their American Girl dolls just terribly, either because they didn't really like dolls, didn't know the value they had so many toys that didn't really matter to them, or they were just too young. Either way, that was a big flex. Having one and not caring about one showed that you were rich. Another reason why the American Girl dolls were so popular goes hand in hand with this moralization of dolls, which is that the American Girl dolls weren't like other dolls. They were educational, and not wearing the trendy clothes of 2001, but rather the fashions of bygone eras. And as someone who grew up with a lot of adults who liked period clothing, the American Girl dolls were always in my destiny. It was preordained by Pleasant Rowland herself. In addition, these dolls weren't vain or shallow, they came with books, and rather than teaching girls whatever parents thought brats taught girls, they not only taught history, but about being a kid and being brave and standing up in the face of adversity, which, not gonna lie, they did do a good job at least in the books. But I also hate this idea of a girl or doll hierarchy, and that if a kid plays with a certain doll, it says something about their character. American Girl dolls are extremely inaccessible price-wise, and it's really shitty how some dolls got a bad rep just because they weren't as prestigious as the American Girl dolls. I also think that the whole not like other girls phenomena isn't solely because of internalized misogyny, but rather girls are just different from one another and deserve to have their different interests realized. Some girls just like Mycene more than American Girl, and that's fine, and it's great that both can exist. Not to mention that the American Girl dolls were still girly. I mean, maybe the earlier catalogs didn't shove pink in your face, but they are still unmistakably feminine appearance-wise. But I grew up as a not like other girls girl whose parents shopped for them in the boy section because all of the girl clothes were too pink and sparkly. And that's its whole other thing about the ridiculousness of gendering clothes. But this is all to say that girls' interests vary, and the analog phenomena isn't necessarily because girls hate one another, but that girls sometimes aren't allowed to explore other interests because they're not valued the same way. So as the American Girl doll brand expanded, it started to include a website where you could play games, physical stores, and books not based around the dolls, but for real-life girls. So let's first start with the online games. So there's an online store for the American Girl company, and it had and still has a section for kids that has games on it. And I used to play so many of these games when I was a kid. Please tell me in the comments I wasn't the only one to play American Girl doll Flash player games in the early 2000s. The ones I played the most were Kit and Samantha's Tricycle and Scooter Race, where you could race against a friend or the computer, and Jess's Waterfall game. Jess, who was a Girl of the Year doll, had a game where you'd hover the mouse and she'd jump on rocks down a waterfall, and it got harder as you went as the rocks would start to disappear if you waited on one of them for too long. I wanted to play it again, but rip Adobe Flash. The games nowadays are kinda dead, which makes sense as I think most kids probably play app-based games nowadays rather than web-based games, but there are still some that exist. For the older historical dolls, they have word jumble and puzzle games, and for the newest historical doll, Courtney from the 80s, she has a mall exploration game where you can take quizzes pertaining to, well, the 1980s. The quiz I took focuses on how much things were back then, specifically electronics, and I failed miserably. Kira, the 2021 Girl of the Year doll with gasp 2 gay aunts living in Australia, has a similar game set up to Courtney where you explore various locations and can play different games. Some are memory games, others are matching games or I Spy type games, and other games are just reading excerpts from the book or watching Kira's videos, so not really much. And of course, in true American Girl fashion, little facts come up that serve to teach you things, and for Kira, they teach you about Australian wildlife. Nanea, the second newest historical doll from Hawaii, has a game, which is basically just making a lei where you drag flowers around, and it's not really a game. Not gonna lie, the games kinda suck now. So now let's talk about the physical stores. The first one opened in 1998 in Chicago and took up 35,000 square feet and is still there today. They currently have 13 operating locations and even have an international location in Manama, Bahrain. At the store nowadays, you can go to the cafe, get a makeover, host a birthday party, go to the doll hospital, and even have an American Girl sleepover with a partnering hotel that features beds just for dolls. It's a lot, and I think again, like the flex culture from the early 2000s, the American Girl company is definitely catering to a certain class demographic. And though originally catering to like grandmas or whatever, today American Girl is known as a luxury toy brand. In the decade after the recession, we've seen how luxury goods and brand names have become in again, and as the class division widens, brands have started to cater more not to now a disappearing middle class, but to the wealthy. You see this with Apple, specifically with their AirPods and reducing the amount of ports in their laptops, and having various iPhones to cater to multiple income levels, like having the iPhone 12 mini, but also the iPhone 12 Pro Max for those who want to set themselves apart. Disney's luxury experience has also heightened in the past 5 years, focusing on their higher paying guests rather than their lower paying guests. And American Girl has followed suit, catering to those who have money to make themselves more money. Not to mention that in all of these places, employees' wages continue to stagnate while prices for various luxuries and experiences rise. A lot of people talk about how Disney and American Girl have started cheapening the brand by getting rid of the magic, and it's like, was there even ever magic there to begin with, or was it just always a cleverly constructed ruse? I think nowadays they're just showing their asses more than usual because they've realized they've become so ingrained in the American zeitgeist that they don't really need to care about catering to the dreams of whoever's left in the middle class, but can instead focus their attention to the wealthy. And for those who can pay for the higher-end experiences at Disney World or the American Girl store, the brand hasn't gotten cheaper, but better. For brands like Disney and AG, they've started to shift their attention to clients who are more recession-proof rather than clients with more volatile incomes. And for those at the lower end, the brand seems to be getting cheaper, but that's only because those brands have stopped catering to that demographic. Some people turned on American Girl after they were bought by Mattel for becoming corporate, but like they were always a corporation. But as much as I hate this idea that American Girl isn't radical anymore, like you have no idea how much I hate that line of thinking, I do think that for the historical dolls, things just aren't looking good for them and haven't for a while. And this can be best illustrated with the virtual museum tour in the American Girl store. The virtual store has a museum where you can click to see the different historical girls' bedrooms, clothes, and accessories, and I bet in person it looks a lot better, but here it just looks so bad. Maybe it's just the rendering, but even the captions of the photos don't feel like they were written for the museum and just seem like recycled passages that are edited to be as apolitical as possible. When I compare the virtual tour to the Meet Addie video that has so much heart and amazing illustrations, it just can't compare. Maybe if they did something that was done in a painted CGI style instead of just the crudest CGI you've ever seen, it might feel warmer, but this is just kinda sad. Though I am glad that the virtual store and museum exists, it just needs more money behind it in order to be fully realized. Now let's finally talk about the Puberty book, or The Caring and Keeping of You, with apparently 3 million copies sold, 2 of which I got for my 13th birthday because that wasn't embarrassing or anything. So just a few things before we go on. Firstly, the girl is marketed for girls, but know that girls aren't the only ones that go through these changes. Secondly, we're going to be talking about weight gain and puberty in general and eating disorders specifically. So if you don't want to hear about that, please go to this timestamp. So American Girl came out with a lot of books, not just ones about the dolls, but also ones for contemporary girls. They marketed themselves, and still do, as a safe space for girls, so it was only natural that they'd come out with a book that talked about puberty, like how your breasts are gonna come in, and eating disorders, and the latter is what I want to focus on. I got this book as a preteen, and the section about eating disorders fascinated me even before I developed one later in my mid-teens, and I think that this was because it was the first place I ever really saw them discussed outside of tabloids about Nicole Richie. Yeah, I'm that old. No one ever really warns you about the weight you gain during puberty, and it's, I think, one of the most shocking things to happen to your body because it can kind of seem like a betrayal and add to this distrust that we have with our bodies. Especially in a highly fat-phobic society and when girls are judged on their appearance, gaining weight, even at a young age, is something that's a lot of kids' worst nightmares, and it can make you feel out of control and that you, again, can't trust your own body and need to find some way to control it. We should really normalize the idea that your body fluctuates throughout your life and that's okay, but women specifically are put into these very infantilizing boxes of needing to stay the same size forever, and that's a huge societal pressure that's impossible to live up to. And before we talk about the book more deeply, I think it's important to note that this book is by Valerie Lee Schaefer, who is not an educator but began her creative career at the Pleasant Company, now American Girl, in 1989 as a product developer and buyer of doll accessories. She's not a doctor or a licensed professional, so it's weird how she's giving her thoughts on all of these issues, but she is. So the part of the book that focuses on your weight overall does a good job at telling kids there is no ideal weight, everyone's bodies are different, and that's great, and that you should eat a balanced diet. Nothing really out of the ordinary. But then it also goes on to give the definitions of bulimia and anorexia, which is kind of awkward knowing that this person isn't a licensed professional and just giving their thoughts on what these disorders are. I'm sure that they did research and have their own personal experiences, but in general, this just kind of feels irresponsible. It also goes into methods, and it kind of feels like a how-to guide, though they also talk about signs. I just don't know if this is the way to open up the conversation or not. It's also a very binary way to put eating disorders as they can sometimes overlap, but I guess again the point is to open the floor for conversations and further research, but I feel like the wording is just very blunt. In addition, they also moralize food, which is really annoying. For example, there's this passage. Beyond the basic food groups, you are also allowed discretionary calories, a fancy name for extras such as the oils, fats, sugars, and salt that are in many of the foods you eat. These should be eating sparingly. A little butter or sweetener goes a long way. The overall message of you being more than your body at the end and just knowing that everyone is different and that should be celebrated is good, but it gets muddled when we start talking about discretionary calories. Like, which is it then? It's of course done in a way that's meant to be helpful, but it just comes off, at least to me, as condescending. And I personally don't know if this will start a conversation between parents and their children. I think it just made me kind of confused and interested in the wrong things, but that might have just been me. And I do think that it's unfair to expect one book to combat the beauty and diet economy and the hundreds of images we see every day. But when I was little, this felt like the end of the discussion rather than the beginning. They did revise it in the early 2010s, as the original one that I read came out in 1998. So that's good, though I haven't read it, and they even made a second one that deals with older girls and their growing pains. I haven't read that one either, but let me know if you have. The books have very high reviews on Amazon, so I feel like this is kind of an unpopular American Girl opinion or just opinion in general. But as a kid growing up with the book and not a parent giving it to their kid, I think the opinions of kids are kind of more important here. And if you were a kid who got this book and loved it and still do, I'm happy for you. This is just my own experience. Well, that's it for the mini ventures of the American Girl doll company. Now let's move on to the movies. So, like all successful toy franchises, American Girl has movies. There are the historical movies featuring Samantha, Felicity, Kit, Molly, Melody, Mary Ellen, and Ivy Ling, and the non-historical movies entitled Krista Stands Strong, McKenna Shoots for the Stars, Sage Paints the Sky, Isabel Dances into the Spotlight, and Grace Stirs Up Success. The most recent film debuted in 2017 and can be watched on Amazon Prime and is called An American Girl Story, Summer Camp, Friends for Life, focusing on Z or Susan Yang. And for this section, I'll only be focusing on the first 3 historical movies that aired on TV in the early 2000s, and of course the one that eventually got a feature release. I'm also not going to be using clips from the movie because of copyright, so please enjoy these illustrations that I did, and I hope you've been liking them so far. So the first ever American Girl doll movie aired on the WB channel on November 23, 2004, and starred Anna Sophia Robb as Samantha, who would later go on to do Bridge to Terabithia and Little Fires Everywhere. The story focuses on Samantha and Nellie's relationship and how Nellie is forced to work at a factory after her father dies, making her and her sisters orphans. It's either that or end up at the orphanage again, which is actually corrupt. Samantha learns about class privilege and that maybe industrialization isn't that great after all, considering kids her age are working in abusive conditions and are being separated from their siblings on the orphan train. In the end, Samantha, who is also an orphan, is adopted by her uncle and aunt, and so are Nellie and her sisters, and they continue to give back to the orphanage and out the corrupt bureaucrat. There's also this point about women's suffrage where Samantha says that she may not want to vote, and she's scoffed at, and then her aunt comes in and says, "We're fighting for the right to vote, not the requirement," and it's interesting but not really sure what they were going for there. I think it's also important to note that they do talk about black servitude and how Samantha is taught not to talk about personal matters with the help, and it's honestly really awkward, but at least it shows that, hey, Grandmary's Mary's kind of a racist and that Samantha's family benefits from white supremacy. It's a small scene and never brought up again, but at least it's there, I don't know. The suffrage movement itself was kind of racist too, which is being talked about more nowadays, but I guess that'd be too much for one day, and of course alienate the white parents who buy the toys and later the DVDs and VHSs. Next there was Felicity's movie starring Shailene Woodley of The Secret Life of the American Teenager that aired on the WB network the very next year. Felicity's story is set in 1774 and was actually filmed in colonial Williamsburg, bringing Roland's story full circle. Her film focuses on her friendship with Elizabeth, who's a British loyalist, and that's a point of contention as Felicity and her family are American and want independence from the crown. There's also a side plot with the abusive Jiggy Nye, who takes pleasure in being cruel to animals, but who Felicity learns to treat with respect and kindness, and believes he can reform, and he eventually does. Lastly, there's the character of Ben, who wants to be free from his apprenticeship and join the militia, but this would mean dishonoring his contract with Felicity's father. I personally find it kind of awkward how Ben fights for his freedom and even runs away, when there's literal enslaved people being held against their will who do not get that type of nuance. Felicity and her family are slave owners, and her grandfather is a wealthy plantation owner, and that isn't erased from the film, which I think is good, but Ben's story seems kind of ignorant in light of the setting. Next, there's my personal favorite American Girl movie, which stars Molly, a girl growing up in 1944. The war wages on, and she finds comfort in the glamour of Hollywood until her dad decides to enlist, and thus her mom has to go off to work, and this turns Molly's world upside down. Not only that, but her mom decides to open their home to Emily, an English girl who is sent to the US to stay safe during the war. I like this movie a lot, mainly because of Maya Ritter's performance and how rude Molly is made to act. It's not only realistic, but just kind of funny. She learns to be less self-centered and to grow up, and I overall really like her story despite it being highly nationalistic and patriotic. And lastly, there's Kit Kittredge, An American Girl, which was released in theaters on July 2nd, 2008, starring Abigail Breslin. Kit's story takes place during the Great Depression, and her once wealthy family is now split up with her dad gone to find work and her mom opening their house to boarders. Kit befriends Will and County, played by a young Will Smith, homeless people who ride the rails. Unlike their once wealthy neighbors, Kit's family takes them in, and the lesson is that Kit learns to treat homeless people with respect and that the police like to frame homeless people because they're easy scapegoats. There isn't talk about redistributing the wealth or government changes they could make so this kind of thing doesn't happen, but the message, like always, is just to be kind and treat people with respect, which is really the bare minimum, but seeing as even that is asking a lot nowadays, I think the message still rings true. Overall, the movies aren't necessarily radical kids entertainment, but rather just a gateway into the world of historical fiction, and for what they are, I think they did a good job. So now let's get into the controversy surrounding the American Girl doll franchise, for which there is a few. Some are more well known than others, so I'll only be talking about a few, but if you know more that I don't list here, feel free to comment them down below. The first and most well-known one I think came around in 2009 with the likes of Gwen Thompson, the homeless American Girl doll. Let me explain. So in 2009, the Girl of the Year, Krissa, was released, and Gwen was one of her friends along with Sonali. Gwen and her mother become homeless after her father leaves them, and they have to live in their car until winter comes. Afterwards, Gwen and her mom take refuge at Sunrise House, a place for homeless women and children, and they eventually get their own apartment. The controversy started back when the doll was released with a piece written by conservative writer Andrea Pizer, who more recently wrote an article declaring that kids are growing up ignorant of 9/11 and that she was proud of Mumford & Sons, who were bravely fighting back against the wokes and cancel culture. In the article about Gwen, she very unabashedly criticizes the American Girl franchise for indoctrinating children into thinking their dolls are real, and then saying Gwen's story is bad because it teaches girls that men are bad, and that she believes mothers should lose custody of their children if they become homeless. As Pizer wrote, as the little kiddies, yes, she refers to kids as kiddies, learn to read about this doll as if she's a human being, one learns that as fall turned to winter, Gwen's mom lost her grip. Mother and daughter started bedding down in a car. When talking about what Gwen's story teaches kids, she writes, for starters, men are bad. Fathers abandon women without cause. She is also telling me that women are helpless and that children in this great country are allowed to sleep in motor vehicles, but mothers don't lose custody over this injustice, because you see, they are victims too. And it's yes, homeless mothers are victims. What's the problem? All I could think while reading this article is that the author must really hate Toy Story. To close the article, she criticizes feminists for critiquing Barbie and then says that she prefers Barbie because she never tried to indoctrinate me. The article, like most vitriol, ended up going viral, and even Cuomo weighed in saying that this doll is too real for the kids of the recession. An AG spokesperson said in response to all of this, the doll is meant to teach tolerance and is part of an outreach program teaching young girls how to spot bullying and stand up and speak out against it. The doll later ended up on this dubious or terrible toy list, which, like I mentioned in the beginning, featured the breastfeeding baby doll and Harry Potter's vibrating broom, and also terrorist Lego. God, I don't know. But just a quick note about the breastfeeding baby doll. It was apparently created by a small family-owned Christian toy manufacturer who said that they were being attacked for promoting something that God intended. The company, Bear Juan Toys, is actually a Spanish company, and they launched their breastfeeding baby doll in the US in the early 2010s, saying, the whole purpose of the breast milk baby is to teach children the nurturing skills they'll need to raise their own healthy babies in the future. And there is something to be said about the stigmatization of breastfeeding and that kids will mimic adults around them and use whatever they have already to do the same thing as the toy. But I personally find Bear Juan Toys to be just a very weird company. In a press release entitled, Does God Support the Breast Milk Baby? Like, this really just sounds like an Onion article, right? The Bear Juan spokesperson said, "We stand by our statement. Little girls need to learn to breastfeed." In the statement, they use kind of progressive language that, hey, there's images of Mary feeding baby Jesus, and that's okay, and there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding, so what's the problem? And it's like, that's not the reason why the toy is off-putting. There isn't anything wrong with breastfeeding, but not all little girls want to be mommies, and that's not necessarily even natural for every single girl out there. The company just wants to enforce binary gender roles under this guise of progressivism, and I'm not buying it. I think we should destigmatize breastfeeding and teach kids about it, but don't shame people for speaking out about why they might find your product questionable when you use rhetoric like "the way God intended" alongside "you just don't understand and actually this toy is breaking down barriers though," because that's just really disingenuous. Not to mention that there's like a link to win your own free breastfeeding baby doll on the press release. Like, how shameless can you get? But anyway, let me know what you think down below. Anyway, going back to Gwen, it's kind of shitty how her story was taken out of context. Also, Gwen isn't the first homeless doll. Nellie was also homeless and an orphan, and there are other dolls who have to go through family problems as well. Kit's dad leaves, though he does come back. Julie's parents are divorced, etc. What I do think is worth critiquing is asking, who is this doll for? Who can actually afford this doll? And it's rich people who aren't homeless. And where's the money going? To a multi-billion-dollar toy conglomerate who sure makes charitable donations, and that's nice and all, but is still again a multi-billion-dollar toy conglomerate. That is worth critiquing, but what's not worth critiquing is the fact that yes, people refer to their dolls as if they're real because that's kind of the point of even having dolls and toys in general. You imagine with them, you create scenarios with them, and talk to them and use them to socialize with others, and like that's not something that you should be cynical about. If anything, that's kinda awesome. The story of Gwen was taken out of context by someone who clearly just hates feminism and dolls and homeless people, and that really sucks because I do think that there's something to say about the fetishization of the other dolls who aren't white or wealthy, and if they really teach the kids who can't afford them about tolerance and understanding, but this just wasn't it. The next controversy is a lot less politically charged and mainly focuses on the cheapening of the brand, mainly because in 2017 the AG team decided to make dolls with permanently sewn on underwear as a way to cut costs, as they wouldn't need to source as much flesh-colored fabric for each individual doll. This was a terrible idea though, because people like that AG is a luxury toy brand. They like the boutique boxes, the customer experience, the painted on eyes, and the underwear thing was just a big slap in the face to a lot of fans. Specifically to fans who like making their own clothes for their dolls, and who just like dressing them up in general. In the end, they decided to reverse this decision shortly after they made the announcement that they were gonna do it. Thirdly, there's Marisol's neighborhood of Pilsen, Chicago. Marisol was a Girl of the Year doll in 2005 who was also Latin American, and more specifically Mexican American. She moves from Pilsen to Des Plaines, as Pilsen in the book was described as a dangerous area that has no place to play, which some people, specifically Latin Americans from Pilsen, took offense to. In 2005, Marisol gained national attention, and Alejandra Ibanez, the executive director of the Pilsen Alliance, told the Chicago Public Radio that, "We're really happy to see that our name and neighborhood is recognized nationally, but why does it have to be seen as this typical poor, dangerous neighborhood?" Ibanez asked. "It's a vibrant community. That's how we want to see it portrayed." Gary Soto, a prolific Mexican-American author who taught at UCB, is the author of the book and was part of the creative process. In 2013, he came out with an article in the Huffington Post explaining why, after the Marisol book from 2005, he decided to stop writing children's literature. He details how the book went viral and became a political talking point for the politicians of the two named areas, and how the mass outrage he experienced affected him psychologically, as there were boycotts of the book and doll, and even a protest outside of the Chicago store at the time. The closing line of Soto's article is that at his age, it's too dangerous to be writing children's literature. Going on Amazon or Goodreads nowadays, the book has mostly positive reviews, and even the worst ones just call it boring. Either way, this was a really big controversy at the time, and I think even now it's remembered as being a very contentious issue, but let me know what you think down below and if you remember it. The last one on this list is, where is the historical Asian American girl doll? For years, there were pleas from fans to create an Asian American girl doll as part of their historical line, and for years, AG came up short. Parents wanted a toy that looked like their kid, that could also teach them history, and it took a long time to even get one. There have been Asian American dolls in circulation like Jess, Sonali, and Zi Yang, but what fans wanted was a historical doll, part of the integral line of the American Girl dolls, and we didn't get one until 2007, and then she was retired in 2014. I think for some reason toy manufacturers in the US are afraid of creating Asian American dolls because of the stereotypes facing the Asian American community, and out of fear of being offensive. It reminds me of that SNL skit where there's no Asian American doll because if we give her a dog and make her a chef, kids might think that she's gonna eat her dog. I guess doll companies see Asian Americans as just too loaded, but it's like, get over yourself and just do the work. I had Ivy Ling and thought it was cool that she grew up in the 70s, but a lot of her story was honestly very cliche. It's about rediscovering your roots, appreciating your heritage, balancing two cultures, and it's like, how many stories already do this? Sometimes it seems that's the only coming of age Asian American story that's out there. And that's to say nothing for the lack of representation when it comes to South and Southeast Asians in the American Girl doll franchise. In general, though, American Girl is moving away from historical dolls because it's just too hard, and it's easier and more lucrative to just push the contemporary line, the Truly Me line, or the create your own line. Not because kids aren't interested in history or because parents aren't interested in history, but because they realize that it's either put up and actually put in the time and effort to represent kids of more diverse backgrounds and histories, or shut up. And shutting up has just been a safer and more profitable bet. Stop romanticizing the American Girl dolls. I read this ridiculous 2013 article while researching from The Atlantic about how the American Girls aren't radical anymore, and it's like, shut up. I'm sorry, but were they ever radical? I mean, like, sure, they did some unique stuff and did treat kids with respect and were educational, but like, also don't romanticize a toy company whose driving force is profit. And I'm sorry, but Pleasant Rowland, for all her talk about having a dream and whatnot, she's in it for the money and made quite a lot of it. She sold the company for almost $1 billion to another multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Like, come on. How radical can something be when it's tied to an entity that owns most of the country's toys? The main line of thinking behind this idea that the American Girl dolls aren't radical anymore is because for the past decade they've heavily pushed their customizable dolls and Truly Me line, where they don't have to worry about the politics of creating a historical doll meant to represent a certain time period and group of people. After the entry-level critiques of capitalism, Native American persecution, and traditional domestic roles for women, perhaps the time has come for a doll who takes her 4th grade class on a field trip to occupy Wall Street. And it's like, maybe not have dolls be the only things in your kid's life to teach them these lessons? Like, why is this falling on toys? They write that since the company was bought by Mattel 15 years ago, the dolls and their stories have shied away from the controversial subjects that once made them distinctive. I guess they could have the Girl of the Year dolls be more political, but they're only out for 1 year. And it takes years to create a doll storyline and features, so it's kind of weird to me that they want the company to keep up with current events when current events are always changing. I also really dislike this pushback against the Truly Me and customizable dolls because it's taking away from the historical dolls or is less radical, because that's not true. Kids should be able to have both options, and yes, maybe it's safer, but also the fact that more kids can customize their dolls to look like them and represent them is a good thing. And 4 years after this annoying article came out, Nanea was introduced as a new historical doll living through the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, so maybe just calm down a little bit. And I'm sorry again, but multi-million and billion-dollar toy companies cannot be and are not radical, so stop romanticizing your childhood. Nanea was based off a real-life biracial Hawaiian woman, Dorinda Makanoanalani Nicholson, who lived through Pearl Harbor when she was 6 years old. Basing Nanea off a still-living real-life person was definitely smart to try to avoid backlash, and the books also deal with anti-Japanese sentiment through Nanea's friend Lily Suda. And like I said in the beginning of this very long video, Kira, the 2021 Girl of the Year, is getting an absurd amount of hate for just having canonical gay aunts that don't even exist outside the book. And actually, as I'm writing this script, AG just released their newest doll line of American Girl dolls, the World by Us dolls, which focus on 3 girls living in the modern day, tackling modern political issues like climate change, immigration, and racism. So it's like, don't worry, they're still political. So before we end this video, I thought it'd be interesting to look at the alternatives for the American Girl dolls. As all popular toy brands, they have alternatives for people who don't want to spend $110 on a doll, and for people who live in Canada. Also, remember in the beginning of this video when I said I went down a rabbit hole that I wish I never looked into? Well, one of those doll lines is the reason why. But before we go on, there are a lot of alternatives to the American Girl dolls, so I'm just going to be talking about ones that kind of mimic the American Girl doll brand in that they're dolls with like history angles to them. So without further ado, let's go. First, there are the Maple Leaf dolls, which were created by Catherine Morton, who used to sell Anne of Green Gables merch. She realized how popular Anne of Green Gables was, but that the story only focused on a certain area and a certain era of Canadian history. Thus, her goal was to bring Canadian history into the modern day and to represent kids from all around Canada, and the company was founded in 2003 and is still going strong. I thought it was cool how the dolls are given stories to talk about modern times, and that there's a focus on geography, which I think sets it apart from the American Girl series. Sila is specifically from Nunavut and is Inuit. There's a whole entry on the website detailing how they created her, and overall I think it's nice that they made her to be a modern day doll, as one of my gripes with the AG company is that they seem to keep the historic dolls of color in the distant past. And that's all very well and good, but it would be cool to see more dolls of color in the 70s and 80s too. Each Maple Leaf doll also comes with a journal, and on the site it says that Sila's journal was translated into Inuktitut as well as French. Let me know what you think of Sila down below, but I will say that the doll line overall is aesthetically, well, to put it bluntly, the face molds scare the crap out of me. And I'm not a person that finds dolls creepy or scary necessarily, but these face molds are just so off-putting. Next, there's the My Life As dolls from Walmart. I'm mainly putting these dolls on the list because of their accessible price point and because they look aesthetically pleasing to me. They are 18-inch dolls made of plastic, and some of them have unique identities, but they don't have extended backstories or time periods or anything. You can also buy sets for them like beds and scooters, just like the American Girl dolls, but for a lot cheaper. Then there are the Our Generation Retro dolls from Target, and they go for around the same price as the Walmart My Life As line. The retro line solely focuses on the 1950s, and there are dolls in various skin tones and features, and in their general doll selection you can also buy boy dolls, which is a feature in the Maple Leaf line as well. The Our Generation Retro dolls are basically the same as the Walmart line, with playsets that focus on different activities like the outdoors, horseback riding, dancing, gymnastics, etc. Now for the last one on our list that left me very confused and kind of disturbed. The doll line is called Hearts for Hearts Girls, which donates $1 for every doll bought to their charitable partner, World Vision, an evangelical Christian NGO that describes its mission as, World Vision is an international partnership of Christians whose mission it is to follow our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in working with the poor and oppressed to promote human transformation, seek justice, and bear witness to the good news of the kingdom of God. So there's that. The Heart for Hearts dolls nowadays seem to only be sold on Amazon, and when you go to their website that's linked on their Facebook page, this is what you get. So yeah, I wonder if they know that their domain was bought by a sex doll reviewer. Anyway, I'm not sure if the company is still around, but the doll stories focus on girls from around the world who have big dreams. But in all, they're just kinda odd to me. Like, there's this Native American doll, but that's all they say about her. Like, they have descriptions on the Amazon store for some of the dolls, but I haven't found one for her, and it's just very reductive. There are indigenous dolls who are based in real history and off real tribes whose communities have worked hard to have them made as authentically and as sensitively as possible. But this just seems like a cash grab. Like, designed specifically for those doll aficionados out there who just love to covet ethnic dolls. The whole company, for me at least, is now just tainted by that rabbit hole I went down, and yeah, I have nothing more to say about them. In the end, I don't think that the American Girl doll franchise is radical, and that's okay, and I still like them despite that. But it is nice to know that being feminist, or at least having a political message, was imbued with the toys from the start, and still continues to be there and annoy people. I think there's a group of fans who definitely see the dolls as touting American values, and I'm glad they disrupt that from time to time when the company does decide to be more political. But there's also a side of the fandom that looks at the dolls through rose-colored glasses of being these pillars of liberalism and progressive ideology, which is also wrong. The American Girl dolls are far from perfect, and it's okay to admit that. I don't think that they ever took their responsibility lightly, and I hope that shows in this video and just in the stories and dolls themselves. Do I think that charging that much for a toy is a lot of money and inaccessible to those who could benefit from them? Yes. Do I also realize how much time and effort it takes to make the dolls? Also yes. Honestly, I find it kind of cool that they were able to be as successful as they were with honestly a really hard to execute idea that is easily mockable if you don't know the whole story. And before we close, I think it's important to say that they didn't stop making historical dolls because kids aren't into history nowadays, but rather it's just too much work, which is a real shame. But maybe the responsibility of educating kids about US history shouldn't fall on the shoulders of multi-billion-dollar companies. And I do want to say that I applaud them for coming out with this new line of dolls, which does seem to be very political, so I like that. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think of the American Girl doll franchise down below. And I just wanted to say that this video was actually inspired by another channel that I watch on YouTube, Izzy's, who makes videos about old internet things and old toy lines, so that's what inspired me to make this video. And I also hope that you liked my little animations. I know that they're not great looking, but I worked really hard on them. Let me know what you think down below, and thank you so much for watching, and to my patrons and members, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.